So we've enabled the opportunity to build a side chain in a private environment or permission environment that allows enterprises and institutions to really set up the parameters that they want to set up. So if they want to have, or it's required that they have their consensus mechanism within a particular jurisdiction, they can set it up that way.
This episode is brought to you by Uphold, which is one of the top crypto platforms in the industry. I've been a user of Uphold since 2018. They make it easy to buy, sell, and trade crypto. They have 300 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform, which includes Bitcoin and all the top altcoins. And folks, they do not commingle. They do not lend out your funds. They are 100% reserved, and you can review their transparency report. And they have a lot of great features that make it easy to execute your trades. They also have a great new product called USD interest accounts, which allows you to park your dry powder or your crypto profits and earn up to 4.9% APY. Now, the 4.9% APY is only on balances over $1,000. Below 1,000, it's 2%. But what's great about this product, guys, is there's no lockups, there's no monthly fees, there's no subscriptions, and best of all, it is FDIC insured just like a bank. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold, visit the link in the description. Welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and my guest today is Billy Sebell, who's the executive director at the XDC Foundation. Billy, great to have you on.
Yeah, great to be here, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Billy, lots of questions around XDC. I've often had people ask me, when are you going to speak to someone from XDC? And, are you looking at this project and so forth? So it's a good time for us to chat, and I can finally learn more as well. But before we get to all things XDC, tell us about yourself, where you're from, and what's your professional background?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm originally from Boston, and I had spent a large part of my career in manufacturing. I've launched some different businesses and consumer products, some clothing businesses, import, export, and consulting as well, within the manufacturing space. And that was all prior to my time in crypto and getting into crypto. That's about 25 plus years of time that I've spent kind of in total doing that other stuff.
And what was your first encounter with Bitcoin or crypto or blockchain, and what was your aha moment?
Yeah, so I guess really, I probably like a lot of people, I had looked at Bitcoin probably pretty early, 2013, 2014, and was like, oh, um, interesting, but didn't really pay too much attention to it. And I guess after the run up in 2017, just kind of a confluence of factors kind of like got me to start looking at Bitcoin in general. And so I got involved in early 2018. And so that's when I really got going.
Mm. And how did you end up working at XDC?
So it's, I kind of always call it's like I had like a 3-year interview. I had gotten involved in early 2018 in the community, and then sometime around November of 2018, I ended up meeting the founders back in uh, uh, they came to Boston actually
Mm.
in 2018, and they were doing a crypto event for blockchain finance. So I decided to help out and try to join in on some of the stuff they were doing, and that's how we got involved. And I was really from that point forward focused on working within the community just as a community member and really trying to build the community out. And I think that was something that, as I said, as part of the 3-year interview, I think by the time 2020 rolled around, there were some things that happened with the network, and the founders had asked for my help. And so in December of that year, I got involved in trying to resolve actually a hack issue that happened with an ERC20 version of our token. And then officially went to work in February of 2021 with Zinfin. and we ended up launching the actual foundation, and I think officially in June of that year, June of 2021.
Wow. And give an overview of XDC as a network and targeted use cases and so forth. What is XDC?
Yeah, so XDC, we're a EVM compatible smart contracts layer one platform. So we're a protocol. So I mean, essentially, we're, as we say, we're like faster, cheaper than Ethereum. And the focus that we've really had has been around enterprises. So trade finance has really been kind of like the long tail narrative of really who we've been. And that's really kind of led us to the point now where, we're actually launching RWAs on the chain and really starting to expand out that ecosystem.
So it sounds to confirm, you're mainly focused on enterprises and the use cases are tokenization, maybe payments as well.
Yeah, so payments is something that is kind of, I'd say, roadmapped
Mm,
right now. It's one of those things that we're really looking to expand out with some of the work we're doing around RWAs. But largely the RWA stuff has been really focused on trade finance
mm,
and really kind of being true to really who we've been to, really since the beginning, which is helping to fund small businesses, SMEs across the globe.
mm. And has that side of or has demand grown since the likes of BlackRock and Franklin Templeton and all these big Wall Street institutions who are now starting to tokenize?
Yeah, I'd say it's an interesting, view of the from the inside because a lot of those things obviously we've been seeing develop over time. And I think, Biddle has really kind of broken things open in a way that you haven't really seen with, any other funds that are out there. And largely because they have the ability to really look at taking a full tokenization of a product from the beginning. For us, we've actually tokenized a US Treasury token,
Mm,
and that's actually a BlackRock ETF fund. And it's nothing to do specifically, we're not doing anything specifically with BlackRock, but
mm,
those funds, like anything else, are available for others to be able to tokenize, in the space. And so I think a lot of what you're seeing right now are the different ways in which people are trying to bring liquidity to the market and also finding ways for people to be liquid within that market. And I
mm.
think, that's the biggest challenge that you're dealing with tokenization. It's not the ability to tokenize anything really. It's more a matter of, how do you bring the liquidity to it? And, where is the interest, on the investment side to get involved with, these traditional assets on chain?
Now, to your point, we're seeing tokenization of funds, and maybe that's phase one. What else? And this is a genuine question. What else do you foresee the tokenization of? What might be in phase two? Do you think it's like real estate, or what do you think it might be?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that right now we're probably moving into a private credit phase.
Mm,
So it's interesting. I mean, I've seen, you had interviewed Carlos from Securitize. We have been working with Securitize. That's what we launched our the US Treasury token on,
mm,
or Trade Tech, the company that did it. And a lot of like what we were seeing at that time was, these treasury tokens starting to come on chain. And I think we were probably like the fifth or sixth or seventh chain to actually have a US Treasury token
mm,
launched on it. And then, you're starting to see really kind of private credit coming on chain now in a way that, people are looking at how can how can you offer more yield in a
mm,
product? And that's something that people are looking at. And obviously, with rates changing, those are things that will fluctuate down if rates continue to be cut with the Treasury. So
mm,
I think that there's more options that people are looking at. And I think that there are also the types of things that can be offered are more simply put together. So I think real estate has different challenges to it
Mm,
that you don't see, from private credit or even now, maybe perhaps like a stock or a bond being offered. It's a pretty simple tokenization to do it. And those that are in the digital space, if they want to own a digital representation of, say, NVIDIA, they can buy it.
mm.
So, those are the kind of the here and the now type of things that are slowly developing.
And to your point, that definitely makes sense. So something that's already in the digital landscape, so to speak, it's going to be easy to put it on the blockchain versus a real world a building, right, in the middle of
That's
Manhattan or whatever it is. There's so many other implications.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the idea of fractionalization of real estate is one of those things that it makes a lot of sense to people. I think the thing is that you have to bring together the supply side with the demand side, and I think that there's a lot of challenges to that, and also where I think you're getting maybe first you would see real estate being sold and tokenized as, any type of house is purchased or sold anywhere in the world. And then you probably see the opportunity for people to come in and try to, fractionalize things. But I think that, look, it's kind of like anything that can be tokenized. At some point, somebody is going to try and tokenize, whether it works or doesn't. And I think we're going to see a lot of iterations of this happening over time. And I have some that I think would be really exciting to see. I don't know how they play out, but I think that there's some pretty cool stuff that you can tokenize. And if you take the lessons out of crypto in terms of community, it makes a lot of sense as to why they could work.
And do you think, and this may be a tough question to answer, as governments are still in the process of learning about this technology and embracing it, do you think eventually folks like you will go to the US government and say, hey, let's tokenize some bonds, and things like that?
Uh, yeah, I think that, you really what you have is, you have layer ones that are building the infrastructure in order to be able to do these types of things. And so the ecosystem is built to make it easy for businesses to come on and say, hey, this is something we want to tokenize. Right now you have like people like Securitize or businesses like Securitize that probably straddle the most when it comes to what's happening on a regulatory perspective and what can happen on a tokenization perspective. And so, there's not a lot of secondary markets on any of this stuff, but the institutions that they're working with and other institutions that are, large enterprises or banks, maybe hedge funds, anybody that's playing kind of within that financial space, who's set up all of the, they've done all of the legal work in order to really kind of launch something. They're the ones who are really in the position to go to the government and say, hey, here's something that we can do. And I think that what you would find, and I think what people are finding is that, the DLT piece is really playing out, which is that there are pretty significant savings for enterprises or institutions when it comes to doing stuff on DLT as opposed to the existing systems. And so, considering the US government probably is not the most efficient in any of these areas either, I think they would probably benefit greatly out of, the tokenization of some of these assets.
Oh, for sure. Now, there was a recent milestone that was achieved by XDC, and that is with Tradeflow Capital converting traditional bills of lading, if I'm saying that right, into tokenized documents. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, you have some jurisdictions that are incorporating, the ability to digitize documents in trade, and therefore you're able to digitize those documents, create a digitalized system, and then do the complete trade and finance the electronic bill of lading. So we had started with this, with IMDA in Singapore, and and this is something it's limited really ultimately in scope because it's such a fragmented industry. You can't just go and say, well, here's an industry solution to something that you're doing. But I think everything is about where you start and how you progress. And so, with what we've been able to do there in effectuating actual trade, we've really started to work down a path where the corridors that really want to take this on and have the proper jurisdiction, that they're able to really, build this kind of trade by trade. And I think that that's a slow process. That's the reality of that particular, type of trade. I think that, when we look at the ability to take a group of invoices for businesses and we're able to finance those, we're kind of like leaving the shipping and all of that stuff out, and those corridors are going to just be naturally dealt with as it normally would be in terms of, the vendors themselves and how they're moving product across the globe. In this case, you're kind of like encompassing a lot more stuff in terms of like jurisdictions and how things flow. So I think that there's probably a longer road to bringing that about, but I think it's pretty exciting when you can see that these things are actually really happening on blockchain now, and you're proving out those use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. A question I had about tokenized assets. And with assets being tokenized on the blockchain, it opens the door for the market to truly be global. Because right now, in certain jurisdictions or countries, people can't access like the New York Stock Exchange or
Yeah.
Tesla stock or whatever it may be. But if you put it on the blockchain, um, almost anyone can access it. How do you feel the regulations will be around that? Will they open it up everywhere, or we will still have these lines, so to speak, that you can
Mm.
only access it in certain parts of the world?
Yeah, I think that you're always going to have uh, some lagging in different areas. I mean, I've talked about this quite a bit in terms of the US, I think. And I've kind of harped on it more recently. I think like Mark Cuban had said something about how, the way in which this has been handled punitively in the US has probably shaved 1 point of GDP off of the US economy.
Mm,
And I really do believe that from the standpoint of we're a burgeoning industry that's looking to bring technology to the forefront that can help other industries just across the globe and in the US. And something as simple as trying to tokenize an asset, or even what somebody may normally do to launch something within their own industry to increase or improve or disrupt what's going on. So they're trying to increase efficiencies and throughputs and decrease costs. Uh, this is really a challenge that businesses have to look at and say, do I want to go down the path of it's already a competitive market? Now I have to deal with uncertainty around what's going on from a jurisdictional, like legal perspective. And so now I have two major things I have to deal with. And so you see a lot of talent, leaving the US as a result of that and going elsewhere. And even just in the industry, talking to people who are in Europe, they just have a much easier time
mm,
doing things than we do. So I think there is going to be a leveling out because at some point, the people who just kind of are showing hate for crypto are confusing that with, what they think they need to do to really kind of, they do it in the terms of protecting people, but in other, I don't really think that that's the case in terms of how it's played out. So I think that people are going to be coming in one way or another, as we know with what's coming up in a couple weeks. And I think that there's a loosening here in the US. And hopefully you see signs of what they're doing in other jurisdictions, MiCA or things like that in Europe where they're clarifying things. Whether you like it or not, these things are starting to make things easier in terms of um, clarity. And so you're going to have to move closer together. Um, how that goes, how soon, all that stuff, it's really, really tough to tell, but a lot can happen in 2 years. So I'm hopeful. Yeah, really hopeful.
yeah, agreed. And it seems like we're on the path, at least we're on the path walking towards the destination of all of these things converging together. And Congress here at least is starting to make some moves, and you're seeing bipartisan efforts. And maybe to your point, the EU making that move with the MiCA regulations, it's going to put pressure finally on the folks here. Like, okay, we got to wake up. We got to get going here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I agree. I think that's probably the key, right? All of those things coming together.
hmm. Now, XDC 2.0, recent launch. Tell us about this and what are the upgrades and the impact you think it will have.
Yeah, so we recently upgraded from our original protocol to 2.0. We were a delegated proof of stake. This particular launch really geared more towards upgrading the protocol for in a couple of different areas, but it's now really a Byzantine fault tolerant consensus mechanism with a security layer that's been added in. Originally, that's how it started, but we really have, as it's kind of developed, I think one of the major features that we've really brought forward is a private subnet that's now able to be set up on the network. And so essentially, it's a side chain. I think if you kind of look at what Avalanche has done with their subnets, it's probably most similar to what they've done there. And so we've enabled the opportunity to build a side chain in a private environment or permission environment that allows enterprises and institutions to really set up the parameters that they want to set up. So if they want to have, or it's required that they have their consensus mechanism within a particular jurisdiction, they can set it up that way. And so we have a subnet manager that allows for easy setup. And I think, to me, one of the game changers around this is that what you're now from an institutional perspective, people were looking at, well, I don't want to be on a public blockchain, although that's changed a little bit in terms of, having some of the benefits of public blockchain. There's still a lot of institutions that are saying, or businesses are saying, we're going to build our own network. We're not going to do anything with any of these public networks. And now, this is really kind of, I guess, another way of bringing blockchain closer to a lot of these businesses where they can set up what they intended to set up, but it's already really built. And so, the managers there, the ability to, if they want to create a token, whatever application they want to build on it, whatever information they want to relay to the public network, they can do. So they can have, the best benefits of cryptography from a public perspective with the benefits of, a private permissioned environment. And that's one of the directions or like that part of the feedback in which we've gotten over the years from institutions. And so it's something that's been in the works for quite a long time. And the other part of the security piece is, that we have a judiciary really now that's been set up. So the judiciary itself, it's all within a dashboard that is, from a code perspective, is overseeing what's going on with these nodes. And so if there's any nefarious activity by a particular node, it's immediately slashed and pulled out of the population. So it's not able to really do anything in terms of, pulling other nodes, towards it and creating some type of, security concern on the network. So obviously trade finance and the things we're doing, we're working to try to create the most secure and reliable network you can have.
That's really great. And going back to the topic of privacy, with those subnets and things like that, that's such a big solution because to your point, many of these companies are like, yeah, I don't want to be in a public blockchain. I don't want my information to be out there. But it's great that folks like yourself and so forth have found that solution to create the privacy subnet, if you want to call it that. And it allows them to operate on a public blockchain, but still maintain privacy. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, and I think, it's funny because I always look at this, I was saying I was from manufacturing, and I always looked at a lot of manufacturers were really behind the times in terms of technology with systems usually. When it comes to upgrading any system in a business, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. And so, when I got involved with blockchain and started looking at it with institutions, you would think, oh, these banks and institutions, they've got the technology behind them. But the truth is they don't. They have old technology. They use a lot of spreadsheets still. The idea that you can have a private subnet and build something on there now creates opportunities that they didn't have before.
Mm.
So it's really, I think, a great opportunity at this point, both for the network and for institutions that are looking to really upgrade what they're doing.
Hmm. How are you attracting developers and helping them? Are there accelerator programs and things like that?
Yeah, so we've gone through, some different, I guess, waves of development progress in terms of how we're looking at bringing people to the network. And, we've done a lot of things around hackathons over time in the last couple of years. More recently, we've really looked at accelerator programs that we could start to actually uh, hone and direct a little bit more of the teams and the types of processes that are in place to start developing those teams. And so now we've got a number of about a half a dozen different programs that are going on currently across in different regions of the globe for accelerator programs, and they're all a little bit different,
Hmm.
and they're led by different people as well in different regions. But I think that the way we're approaching it right now is it's really the greatest opportunity when you think about how you can go through a process and kind of handpick and develop these particular uh, projects or teams to build on your network. And it's not just a matter of what it is that they're doing, but how are they operating, and do they have the business processes in place as well as the development chops. It's not just a developer who says, "Oh, I've put together this particular application." You have to be able to have a plan as to how you're going to execute and build your community. And so I think there's a lot of great opportunity in what we're doing around that. And that's really kind of the roadmap as we're moving forward
Hmm.
into 2025.
Got it. Yeah, that's really great. There's some questions that came from the community. For example, folks wanted to know if there are any upcoming exchange listings and things along those lines.
Yeah. I know this is always a hotbed question for people within the community. I think that everybody always wants to know, but like me, like being from originally the community, this was the thing years ago when we were like, well, when's this or when's that? But look, I think the thing I could say about it, which is really not too much, is that the idea behind what exchanges have to offer these types of integrations is access for users to come onto the network. And our focus has always really been about what are the things that we can do to create and develop more access for retail users to really operate on the network, use the utilities in which, we're putting on there. And so, with this kind of understanding this, I mean, we've worked, as a network very hard to bring about all of the different types of integrations that are going to bring about, greater use. And so, we're continuing to do this as we move forward. And, that's not going to change, until we really accomplish having the entire ecosystem built out the way we want to.
Mm. There was also another question around R3. Uh, any updates around R3 and XDC? And I know there's been talks of R3 potentially looking to be sold and how that would impact XDC.
Yeah, I mean, we've always had a very good relationship with R3. And, I can't really speak to what those rumors are. What I would say is that, we developed a bridge to Corda. I mean, Corda itself is really in many ways independent of R3. R3 built it
Mm.
so that anybody could come on and integrate with it. And so, we built the bridge with the idea that institutions and others were interested in, really trying to do transactions on Corda. And also it allowed us a bit of a private public network opportunity there, like kind of similar to what we're doing right now with subnets. And so one of the things that ultimately kind of, I think, we've always looked at is we try to build on as many developing, development opportunities as we can. And, this is a space that's like constantly changing. So, you have layer ones that are deciding to become a layer two and moving to another chain. There is going to be all sorts of things that happen as we move forward. And so we're really just trying to create the most opportunity that's out there. So if somebody comes to us and says, here's what we'd like to do and we want to build on Corda, then that's something that, we're able to do. And we don't know how anything is going to turn out, but we're going to continue to do what we're doing. And I think, you've seen that with SBI VC in Japan, who's more recently done some stuff with Corda. There isn't any intention to change the direction of what we're doing. And, I think until something changes, that's really where we stand with it.
Oh, for sure. Now you mentioned SBI. Are you guys doing anything with them in particular?
Yeah, well, we've been from the time in which SBI first started looking into the network. We've had touch points, with them. A lot of what now is kind of like SBI VC, which is and XDC combined into a into its own entity is really looking at, how, in the Japanese market, they're able to really, bring XDC as a network to the forefront. And so they're continuing to work on different initiatives, not anything I can specifically discuss.
Mm.
And, internally, there's not a lot of, I mean, they're their own entity, on the SBI side. So, whatever their plans are and how they're going about what they're doing is really kind of something they would need to speak to. But I think we expect to see more development over there. And, it's definitely an exciting part of what we've been trying to do to grow the ecosystem.
For sure. Um, so Billy, lots of things are happening in the crypto industry. Wall Street's here. You have ETFs that have been launched. Big institutions we were just talking about tokenizing. You got possible crypto legislation right around the corner. There was some movements this year with a bill out of the House. Are you anticipating further adoption and growth as we head into 2025 with all these things in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think if you've been in crypto for any time, I mean, really, the people are kind of looking at 2025 as being a year of shift, right, from where we've been. I think from obviously the building perspective, a lot has gone on. I think sentiment-wise, that's probably where most of that shift is going to be happening. With BlackRock coming in and the Bitcoin ETFs and all of these, kind of I guess, trendsetters within the financial markets, I think you're really beginning to see that people are taking, crypto more seriously around, what the benefits really are. And, I think that, probably less about like regulation or regulatory stuff.
Mm.
I think more like right now, I think most of the conversations I have going on, because the election is, regardless of what side you're on, is such a toss-up.
Mm.
And nobody really knows what's going to happen. I think there's this huge wait and see. Like everything is going to be about, well, once we have some kind of clarity, the, you know, the industry or the market or this will happen or that will happen. And so I think people are really first and foremost waiting for that. I do think that whoever wins is going to be doing something very different than what has happened. And when you consider there's 50 million crypto owners, in the US, it's a huge voting block of people.
Mm,
And I think with the economy being what it is and people looking at what's happening with, are they better off today than they were a year ago financially and what's happened with inflation? Uh, I think people are always looking at, what's happening in the industry to how it can personally benefit them. So, I think that there is a lot of factors. Maybe it's like less macro and it's more just kind of all of these different things that are occurring in geopolitically, the types of things that are happening within the market.
mm.
So I'm very bullish on that overall because I feel like having been here and been building through some of the more difficult times in this industry, it feels like there's a lot that's really coming together and that people are, they're kind of ready for what's next.
Yeah, for sure. I see just a lot of things converging and uh like for example, like the stablecoin market has been heating up significantly, and now there's talks of, a proper stablecoin in the US could help maintain the US dollar reserve status and all these things. So it's just the alignment of TradFi, politics, and much more. And
Mm.
there's just a sense in the air of like optimism and building, and we've kind of crossed the chasm to like mainstream adoption and things like that. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, yeah, well, the 170 plus billion in stable coins within the market, and when you consider money supply, it's tiny compared to what is, but it's huge compared to what has been.
Hmm.
So I think that I've always looked at the one thing about whether it's blockchain, crypto, or a combination of the two, the technology and or whether it's Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies or whether it's traditional instruments coming on chain. Ultimately the bottom line is there's a solution somewhere to the debt issues, and there are solutions to what's happening across the globe from a financial perspective in these technologies. I don't know what those are. I think that, there's smarter people in that area than me, and, ultimately, hopefully we figure that stuff out. But I think even today, I just read that in Florida, they're looking to have Bitcoin be part of their reserve. And, that would be obviously the first state in the union to do something like that. We've only seen that out of certain countries. And, I guess you can argue whether it's worked for them or not, but I think so far, I think today you'd probably argue that was a good decision on the part of anybody that decided to use it as part of their reserve, especially if they're an economy that is, they're not as stable.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it's exciting times. I, I'm curious on that note, in 2025, we are going to get these major announcements like states and even more countries adding Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And then we know in the presidential campaign, Donald Trump and Cynthia Lummis proposed those things. And in addition, more companies adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet as a hedge or as a reserve. So I'm kind of anxiously anticipating that where it's like I want to I'm curious who's going to be the next domino to fall.
yeah. Well, it's always like, as it relates to banks and like what we've been dealing with for so many years, it's always like you talk to banks and they're always like, maybe they're interested in something or somebody is interested at the bank, but the traditionalists who have been there are not or were not at all interested whatsoever in anything to do with crypto. And then you start to see that slow change, but they're saying usually by action that, well, we'll let the non-bank originators and others get involved in this first, and we'll see if it works for them. And if it does, then we'll get involved. And I don't think it's anything different than what's going on in private business.
Mm.
So once you start to see major, Fortune 500 companies adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet, and I'm talking other than MicroStrategy, who has made it their strategy to do that. Um, I think that you're going to see dominoes fall pretty quickly.
Mm, for sure. Billy, I got some wrap-up questions here for you. The first
Yep.
is if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
Yeah, Wild E. Coyote and Roadrunner.
That'll be a fun one. Rapid fire questions. Favorite food,
Favorite food, ice cream.
favorite musician or band,
Grateful Dead.
favorite movie.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Great one. Favorite book.
Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell.
When you're not working at XDC, what are you doing for fun?
Yeah, I like to play guitar.
Me too.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, what genre do you play?
Well, mostly rock and roll. So, but yeah, Grateful Dead, a lot of, um, and I don't know, Bruce Springsteen or, but yeah, I'm definitely, I'm a little long in the tooth. So, I tend to be in terms of classic rock is really kind of, where I kind of play.
Yeah, I'm the
So,
same. I love classic rock. Although I play a variety of genres, I'll play funk, jazz, whatever it is, blues. Um, I've learned a lot of my guitar skills through playing AC/DC, Led
yeah.
Zeppelin, and learning those riffs and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, and for me, I mean, I'm really into playing acoustic, playing and singing. So, trying to put together a set of some different tunes, and really trying to see whether it's something that you could actually get out and just play out for fun. So, so I have expanded a bit into maybe a little bit more modern stuff, but. It's yeah, even just playing, getting in the headspace of playing and away from all of the day to day is very freeing.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. That's my
Yeah,
escape. I go pick up my guitar and then I forget about everything else.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I love it. So
Um,
excellent.
Billy, pleasure chatting with you. Really excited for the future updates around XDC. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony. I really appreciate it. It's been a great time.